for number 1, we're just going to go ahead and we can multiply everything together. So if you notice, I can cancel the 3 and the 9 because it's up and down. So we can cancel by 3. 3 goes into 3 one time. 3 goes into 9 3 times. Then we're going to go ahead and multiply going across. So as we do that, we get -1. Since a has the same base in its multiplication, we're going to go ahead and add the exponents. So we're going to have a to the 13. And on the bottom, I'm going to have 3 times 4, which is 12. And again, a has an invisible 1, so we're going to go ahead and add the exponent. So we have a to the 3rd. So now my a is the division problem. So what we can do is we're going to go ahead and subtract the exponent. So 13 subtract 3 is 10, and there's more on top. There's more on the numerator, so I'm going to go ahead and write a to the 10 over 12. Now the negative can go in the middle, or it can go on the denominator. So my answer is going to be A. For number 2, we have that David can wash a window of a building in 7 hours, and Sal can do the same job in 5 hours. If they work together, how long would it take them to wash the windows of a building? So we're going to set this up by having David, Sal, and their time together. So David can wash the one windows of a building, or so 1 work, 1 out of 7. Sal can do the same job in 5 hours, so he can do 1 job in 5 hours. And we're trying to find their time together. And then together, we want to know how long it would take them to do 1 job. So notice that our denominators are 7 and 5, so we're going to multiply everything by 7 and 5. So my 7's cancel, and I'm left with 5x. Here my 5's cancel, I'm left with 7x. And then 1 times 7 times 5 is 35. So we're going to go ahead and add like terms. So we're going to have 12x equals to 35. Divide by 12. So 12 divided by 35. So 12 goes into 35, so 2 times, so that's going to be 24. Subtract, so I'm going to have 2 and 11, 12. For number 3, we're going to go ahead and factor. So we ask 2 numbers multiplied together that gives you 25m squared, which is 5n and 5m. And then 2 numbers multiplied together that gives you 121 over 49. So that's going to be 11 over 7. And since it's negative, one has to be a positive, one has to be a negative. So notice if you cross multiply, you get a 0, which is what you want because you don't have a middle term. So when you write it straight across. So my answer is B. For number 4, I'm going to go ahead and put my numbers together and then the B's together. That way you can see and you can visualize it in your head what we're doing. So it's a negative number, not a negative exponent, so I'm not going to move the 3 to the denominator. It's going to stay on top, but I am going to reduce it. And I'm going to reduce it by 3. 3 goes into 3 1 time. 3 goes into 6 2 times. Now with my B's, there's more in the denominator, so they're going to stay in the bottom. And I'm going to go ahead and subtract the exponent. So I'm going to have -1 over 2. And then on the bottom, I'm going to have b to the 3rd. And there's an invisible 1 on top. So I have -1 over 2b to the 3rd. For number 5, we're going to do the same thing that we did with number 4. We're going to go ahead and separate them into 3 different fractions. The numbers, the c, and the d's. So if you look at the numbers, we have 15 divided by 5. That will give me 3. Okay, notice that this is a negative exponent, So this is going to get moved to the bottom. So I'm going to have c to the 3. And because it's times, we're going to go ahead and add the exponent. So I'm going to have, write it over here. So I'm going to have c to the 14 on the bottom. And then there's the invisible 1 on top. The d to the negative 4 is going to get moved to the top. So I'm going to go ahead and add the exponent. So I'm going to have d to the 9th. And there's an invisible 1 on the bottom. So if I multiply going across, I get 3d to the 9 over c to the 14. For number 6, we're just going to do which one is in order. So if you notice, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to divide by a. Then we're going to get the middle term divided by 2 and square it. And then out of these, which one are you going to do first? Are you going to square it or take the square root? Okay, so you're going to square it first and then take the square root. So that would be the order of solving the quadratic formula. For number 7, we're going to start with our y-intercept. So we want our y-intercept to be 4. So notice that b, my y-intercept, is not 4. So I have the choices between a, c, and d. So now we're going to use my slope. Since my slope is -2, that means I'm going to go down 2 and to the right 1. So from my y-intercept, I'm going to go down 2 to the right 1. So it's not a, down 2 to the right 1. So it has to be c. To determine how many times the graph intersects the x-axis, okay, that would mean if I graph the parabola, I want to know how many times I'm going to have across the x-axis. So we're going to use something called the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac. So a is 2, b is -4, c is 2. Remember, it goes in the order of the quadratic. So a is the leading coefficient of x squared, b is the leading coefficient of x, and c is my constant term. So I'm going to have -4 squared minus 4 times 2 times 2. So -4 squared is -4 times -4, which is positive 16. -4 times 2 is -8, and -8 times 2 is -16, which is 0. So remember, it's a ton of work. So how many times does it intersect? It intersects 1 time. For number 8, since it's division, we're going to go ahead and subtract the exponents, and there's more on the bottom. So that means 7 subtract 5 is 2. So that's going to stay on the bottom. And on top, I have an invisible 1. Number 9 asks, what number would you add to complete the square? So if you complete the square, you're going to get the middle term divided by 2 and square it. So 14 divided by 2 is 7, and 7 squared is 49. So what are you going to add to both sides? 49. For number 10, you're going to go ahead and solve. We're going to move the 6z to this side. Since it's negative, it becomes a positive. And we're going to move the -2 to the other side, and it becomes a positive. So 6 plus 2 is 8. 2 minus 5 is -3. Divide by 8. So we didn't divide by a negative number, so we're not going to switch the inequality sign. Okay, so for 11, we're going to go ahead and separate the numbers, the w's, and the x's. So 80 divided by 8 is going to be 10. We're going to subtract the exponents. Notice that there's more w's in the denominator, so they're going to remain in the denominator. So I'm going to have w to the 5th, because 9 minus 4 is 5. And then for the x's, I'm also going to subtract the exponent, so that's going to be x to the 8, and there's an invisible 1. So if I multiply going across, I'm going to get 10x to the 8 over w to the 5th. For number 12, we're going to use this formula. And what we're going to do is wherever we see an m, we're going to substitute 3 minutes. So we're going to have 4 times 2 to the 3. So 2 times 2 times 2, 3 times. So that's going to be 4 times 8, which is 32. For number 13, we're going to solve. So one of the things is, notice that it's not equal to 0. So the first thing I'm going to do is distribute. And then I'm going to move the 18 to the other side. So it becomes a negative 18. So then we're going to factor. Two numbers multiplied together, that gives you x squared. Two numbers multiplied together, that gives you negative 18. Since it's negative, one of them has to be negative, the other one has to be positive. So since it's equal to 0, we're just going to go ahead and set both of them equal to 0. And we're going to move the 6, and then move the negative 3. So we get x equals to 6 and x equals to negative 3. For 14, since n to the negative 6 is the negative exponent, we're going to move it to the bottom. So notice that on the bottom, in the denominator, it's a multiplication, so I'm going to go ahead and add the exponents. And on top, I have an invisible 1. For number 15, we want to know what the equation of the inequality is. So notice that all my equations are the same. So all they're really doing is testing you to see if you understand what is greater than, less than, dotted versus solid. So notice that it's a dashed line, so I know that there's going to be no line on the bottom. So the answer can't be A or C. And it's shaded on top of the line, so it's going to be greater than. For 17, notice that the z is the negative exponent, so I'm going to write it on the top. So I'm going to have y to the 12th, and then the z's, since now is multiplication, I'm going to go ahead and add them. And on the bottom, I'm left with an invisible 1, or I don't have to write anything since it's an invisible 1. For 18, since it's multiplication, we're going to go ahead and add everything together. So 9 plus 3 is 12 plus 1 will give me x to the 13. For number 19, I have 1/2 squared. So that means 1/2 times itself 2 times. So that's going to be 1/4. So 20, we have that Tony's average driving speed for a 5-hour trip was 38 miles per hour. During the first 2 hours, he drove 50 miles per hour. What was his average speed for the last 3 hours of his trip? So we're going to have 3 boxes, one for his first part of his trip, his second part of his trip, and his total. Well, it says that for a 5-hour trip, he drove 38 miles per hour. So his distance that he wrote is going to be 38 times 5, which is 190 miles. So he drove a total of 190 miles. For the first 2 hours, he drove 50 miles per hour. So if you multiply 50 times 2, you get 100. So for the first part of his trip, he drove 100 miles. So we want to know what his average speed for the last 3 hours of his trip was. So first, I need to figure out how many miles he drove for the last 3 hours. So he drove 90, because 100 plus 90 is 190. So then what do we have to do with these numbers? We're going to have to divide 3 into 90. So 3 goes into 9 3 times. So it's going to be 30 miles per hour. That was his average speed. For 21, we want to factor completely. One of the things that I noticed is that they all have a greatest common factor. So I'm going to go ahead and factor that first. And then I'm going to factor guess and check. So I'm going to look at my first and last numbers. So two numbers multiplied together, that gives you a squared. Two numbers multiplied, that gives you 18. One of them has to be negative. So notice if you cross multiply, that does give you your negative 7a. So I'm going to have a minus 9, a plus 2, and then don't forget to bring down your 2. For 22, I need to deal with this power to a power first. So since it's parentheses to a power, you're going to have to multiply to all three bases. So I'm going to have 2 to the third times a to the 12, because 4 times 3 is 12, times b to the 12, because 4 times 3 is 12. And then the second one is just going to stay the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my numbers together. 2 to the third is 2 times itself 3 times. And I'm going to put my a to the 12, a to the 5th, b to the 12, b to the 4th together. So I'm going to have 88, a to the 17, b to the 16.